We're going to invite our first speakers to speak briefly about Indigenous and Canadian histories. And I don't know if, would you like to come up together? Next is Victoria Freeman. Victoria Freeman I've known for many years. She is a landmark watershed scholar in the work of thinking about the roles and responsibilities of not only academics and historians in this country, but also the role of non-Indigenous peoples within this country. And she's wrote an incredible book called, I don't want to mess up the title, Distant Relations. How My Ancestors Colonized North America. I just didn't want to mess it up. So without further ado, I want to introduce both of them up here. So please welcome them up.
Bonjour, Victoria Freeman, the Tishnakas, Ottawa, Nitonji. Hello, everyone, and I want to begin by acknowledging this land and this Algonquin territory. I'm from Ottawa. I was born here, and this is the very first time in my life that I have acknowledged that this is Algonquin land. I've not lived here since I was 17, but all the time that I was growing up, I never knew an Indigenous person. The only Native people I saw were on TV. This was in the Red Power days, and I think at least some people that I knew were going, oh, those people, they're such poor losers. My ancestors obviously are not Indigenous. They are from the British Isles. So I've reflected a lot on what I grew up with since I have arrived here last night. The other branch of my family, aside from people who were kind of put off by uppity Indians, the other people were Christians who were helping Indians. And my father, when I was a child, told me stories of some Anishinaabe children he had played with on a dock in Shoal Lake. He's 91 now, this is a long time ago. And he still remembers their names, but what I found out only as an adult was that dock was the dock of the residential school. And my grandfather was involved with the administration of Cecilia Jeffrey Indian Residential School. So I come here as someone who is trying to understand who I am, where I came from, how I got here, and where am I now? And these are all really complex questions. My ancestors have been in North America since the 1630s. They came to New England before they came up to Canada. And they were involved in colonialism in every conceivable way, as missionaries, as diplomats, as farmers who moved on to Indigenous land. Many different ways. And at a certain point in my life, I became involved in solidarity work, and I found that I kept having reactions to things that people said. And I realize now a lot of that was denial and defensiveness. And at one point I said, well, I didn't ask to be born here. And then I kind of went, how did I get here? How did my ancestors get me into this situation that is clearly so destructive and so unsustainable? So I personally have spent many years understanding my own family's relation to colonialism and understanding that colonialism is not an event in the past, It's a structure. It's a structure. And it's something that we all have to work to dismantle. I've also learned that there's something that non-Indigenous people really have to struggle with, and that's what academics call cognitive dissonance. It's you're brought up a certain way to believe certain things, and then, whoa, you start learning about your history in a totally different way that forces you to change how you understand yourself. So, I guess what I look at in terms of decolonization is that there are many aspects to it. There's the external, there's the political and social and economic structures which have to change. But there's also a psychic structure of dominance that non-Indigenous people have learned and perpetuate, that's passed down through families, through schools. There's a lot of unlearning that we have to do. My colleague, Lee Miracle, who I've co-taught a course with called The Politics and Process of Reconciliation, she speaks of the Stalo teaching of Lummi, which is facing yourself. And I think for non-Indigenous people, we can do solidarity work, and that's great, but we have to understand what we've inherited, what we are still benefiting from, and how colonialism has shaped us, all of us. I loved your comments, Leanne, and I do believe that decolonization and reconciliation is about restoring relationship, reciprocity, our interconnectedness with each other, and especially with the land. I think the land has to be the framework for it all. It's not Canada. The framework is the land. The government of Canada may prove to be the last force for decolonization in Canada. It might move to decolonization kicking and screaming. But we as people can do so much. And what I've loved about the resurgence we've seen over the last few months is that it is joyous. There's incredible pain behind it. There's incredible determination in standing firm. But there's also a wonderful inclusiveness and an expression of who we could be together and how we could live together, not obliterating our differences, recognizing our differences, recognizing that at least some of the time Indigenous peoples will want to work on their own, restoring their nations, and sometimes with us as allies. So I just want to say how honored I am to be here and to take part in this conversation. Every moment is historic. There have always been allies, but very few. And what's exciting now is that there are more and more non-Indigenous people who are trying to educate themselves and work respectfully and understand from Indigenous people what needs to be done. And finally, I'd like to say that it is a work of transformation. That for non-Indigenous people, we need to learn about Indigenous ways of being and Indigenous ways of thinking, Indigenous ways of experiencing the world. We can't decolonize without understanding those things and without opening our hearts as well as our minds. Thank you.
I was getting frustrated over there because Victoria, of course, gave incredible quotes in the last minute there. I wanted to rip out my phone and throw them down. Psychic structure of domination. Every moment can be history. I think that's incredible, great thoughts. And my sister Leanne, I could just listen to her all day. In fact, I phoned her and said, "Can you just talk to me? just talk to me." And so she's been very gracious in being able to help me through a number of my own thoughts on things. And so what we've done is we've purposely paired some speakers together to engage in a dialogue and to get us to think about a dialogue and how that would operate also within as a model for all of us to think about. And so beyond this day, that you can think about the ways in which people from different walks doing similar kinds of work but in different ways can come together and have a conversation and think about the ways in which they're together. So I have definitely a question for the two of them. But what we're going to do is we're going to invite, if there's anyone, members of the community that wants to come up and share those. So is there anyone, if you want to come up to the microphone, but maybe I'll start off the questioning for today. If you want to have a question, then sort of wave your hand at me and I'll take a look at you. But maybe what I could do is, Victoria, you talked about the psychic structure of domination, and what I'm assuming that you're talking about is this kind of relationship that was intended to be much in the way Leanne was talking about, of a relationship of reciprocity and equality based what we might call treaties, but the ways in which that was carried out was very much a sort of method of domination, which I think Leanne painted for us very starkly. But then both of you talked about love and talked about the ways in which love can engage this psychic structure of domination. So what is that actually? I mean, that's a great concept, and I definitely know what I think about it. But what perhaps would you think? What does that actually look like for someone? I'm typically on radio stations where I'm asked, how do I start? How do I start this work? And how do I do it in a peaceful, nonviolent fashion? And we can say love, but then what does it look like in terms of sort of a tangible way of engaging these different structures of domination that sort of engage through a kind of... So I did exactly what you shouldn't do, which was just keep talking. So I'll invite one of you to come up and engage that answer. Leanne or Victoria?
Okay, so what was the question again?
What does love look like?
Niigaan's a closet hippie. Well, I think one of the things that when I was growing up, I was led to believe that the relationship that we have now was inevitable. And I think as I've become an adult, I see that it's a series of choices that Canadian political leaders are making for us. And in Anishinaabe governance, it really... The same principles that govern our nation, govern our communities, govern our clans, govern our families, govern our individual acts. So if you use the relationship as an analogy, right now Indigenous people in Canada are in a very abusive relationship. We're in a very abusive marriage. And what we want to be in a very, very healthy marriage. We want to be seen as a partner. We want our gifts to be seen. We want to be appreciated. We want to be cherished. And we want to be able to contribute to the conversation in a way that's transformative. So our political traditions and our ideas about treaties have been absent from the discussion. And they're absent from a lot of the negotiation tables. But those for me hold a lot of the answers. They hold a lot of the way forward. They set out the terms for sharing the land or sharing parts of the land and having separate nations, separate jurisdictions, while we're all working together to take care of that mother. So now Niigaan's busy. Yeah, do you want to?
I apologize.
Sorry, I'll be brief. I'll just speak very personally of one of the ways that I've experienced love in this context, which has been with my teachers, with Indigenous people who have agreed to work with me and teach me. And I am a slow learner. I've had many times where I have really messed up, and done things that were, or said things that were racist, exuding privilege, all kinds of things like that, where just thoughtless, insensitive, and where I know that it was very upsetting to people who I was trying to learn from and work with, and that they have generously not walked away, but have made a commitment to help me work through those things, so that I can also work through with others. I think for me, it's patience. Love is patience, but also firmness in the sometimes very difficult things that people have said to me, have called me on, and that's been very difficult to hear, but I know that it comes from a place of love, of wanting me to hear them, and my love is in continuing to try to hear them and to understand what our relationship truly is.
Good. Thanks. So sorry, I got interrupted there. You can imagine I have different people trying to get my attention. But what I was also thinking about was gift giving. For me, gift giving has been the one method in which I've been able to really engage a lot of dialogue in Manitoba, and teaching everyone in Manitoba that Manitoba is a foundation of gifts. That whenever I go anywhere, I particularly engaged a particular editor in southern Manitoba on an issue of what he wrote, and one of the ways in which I did that was offer him coffee to have a coffee with him. So that's what I was thinking about for me anyways, and so I appreciate Niigaanwewidam for both of your words. So we have a question over here. So.
Is this mic on?
Oh.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Victoria Freeman. I live here in Ottawa, but I'm originally from Thunder Bay, Ontario. I'm from the Deer Clan. I just wanted to thank Leanne for her profound words. But I'd like to address this to Victoria, the other Victoria in the room. My name is Victoria. And Victoria, you touched on something about settler mentality of the superiority complex that they inherited from their own history and their family, and they brought it here to North America. And I'm wondering how, as Indigenous people, we could help the settlers get over that point of privilege. I myself try to use humor, but sometimes people don't understand the humor. Is that when they're talking about great lofty concepts, so I try to bring them back down to earth and talk about, make a joke about it. But they don't quite understand that I do understand what they're saying, and then they start all over again and talk from the beginning to explain this concept. So I'm just wondering if you have another method that you can suggest.
Well, I guess what I'd say is I think humor is a really potent strategy, tactic. It works. I don't know. You've got me there. I do know that often that pose of expertise can be a mask for fear of ignorance, fear of actually being honest about how uncomfortable and scared we are, fear of feeling how compromised we are. And so I guess one thing I think is that non-Indigenous allies need to do a lot of the work with other non-Indigenous people in helping them understand the complexity of their feelings, to get them through guilt or whatever to more constructive attitudes. And that's not really addressing superiority per se, but I think it can be the flip side. And I also just want to say, while I have the mic, that for a lot of non-Indigenous people, they get stuck in a kind of guilt. And I think it's more productive to understand that often we feel grief. We don't often acknowledge that we feel grief. We feel grief about this terrible history and what it says about us and what we've done to Aboriginal people. It's a very heavy grief to actually face.
Okay, and bravery. So I love all of these different themes that are coming out and how to engage and how to not only politically but also on a face-to-face level. And I think that's great. So we have time for one more question in this session. So, yeah, were you at the mic first? So I apologize. Can we get back to you? Is that okay? We'll get back to you.
Yeah, Twitter me.
Okay. Niigaanwewidam. Good. Okay. So yes, go ahead.
Well, I appreciate the mic. I just wanted to.
Say your name if you could.
Jennifer Fletcher. I'm a single mother, and I work at a day program for adults with disabilities. So I have a lot of experience with social services, and they're woefully underfunded. And I feel really the government's writing void checks, and I would love to start networking, interacting with people who want to see alternatives to funding or to systemic social services. I don't feel that's where solutions lie for the health and well-being of people. And I feel very strongly that, Indigenous people have a framework and a community that we all need to learn from. And I guess this is really more of a comment, I suppose, than a question, but I guess I'm looking for answers personally about how I can better move forward in that direction.
So I understand, Leanne has done a lot of work in not only Peterborough but also within that area and beyond sort of without government funding. And I think, would you be mind speaking a little bit about that and sort of the ways in which the communities come together for certain events that can get beyond maybe towards empowerment, community empowerment?
Well, I think it's a good question, and I would agree with you. And I think that from within my own culture, we had a very, very, very caring culture. We were very, very caring and very gentle people, and it was very, very important for us to create inclusive spaces where everyone was honored for whatever they could contribute and whatever gifts they could contribute. And so I guess in my own life, I have a lot of control over sort of what happens inside my family, inside my own house, and I don't have a lot of control over what happens at kind of the nation level. So trying to recreate that caring society and that gentle society and that society that that kind of culture that asks how much can I give back rather than how much I can take. I think that's where those seeds get planted, and I hope that as those seeds get planted and nurtured, that next generation will have that as a part of their fabric, because I think we have to take care of each other. I think Indigenous people know that.
Okay, so that's really one of our first forays. This is why we say miigwech to Victoria and Leanne for coming up and sharing their knowledge and their experience with us. But it's an incredibly important dialogue, and I think that we've started that in a really important and beautiful way by talking about love and talking about how do we engage these issues in a real personal manner, but also in a not only a micro manner but a macro manner in terms of the community, province, nation, and then what those relationships look like. Colonized North America. I just didn't want to mess it up. So without further ado, I want to introduce both of them up here. So please welcome them up.
Ani Bojo, Victoria Freeman, Niigaanwewidam James Sinclair. Hello, everyone, and I want to begin by acknowledging this land and this Algonquin territory. I'm from Ottawa. I was born here, and this is the very first time in my life that I have acknowledged that this is Algonquin land. I've not lived here since I was 17, but all the time that I was growing up, I never knew an Indigenous person. The only Native people I saw were on TV. This was in the Red Power days, and I think at least some people that I knew were going, oh, those people, they're such poor losers. My ancestors obviously are not Indigenous. They are from the British Isles.
We're going to invite our first speakers to speak briefly about Indigenous and Canadian histories. And I don't know if, would you like to come up together? Next is Victoria Freeman. Victoria Freeman I've known for many years. She is a landmark watershed scholar in the work of thinking about the roles and responsibilities of not only academics and historians in this country, but also the role of non-Indigenous peoples within this country. And she's wrote an incredible book called, I don't want to mess up the title, How My Distant Relations. How My Ancestors.
And my grandfather was involved with the administration of Cecilia Jeffrey Indian Residential School. So I come here as someone who is trying to understand who I am, where I came from, how I got here, and where am I now? And these are all really complex questions. My ancestors have been in North America since the 1630s. They came to New England before they came up to Canada. So I've reflected a lot on what I grew up with since I have arrived here last night. The other branch of my family, aside from people who were kind of put off by uppity Indians, the other people were Christians who were helping Indians. And my father, when I was a child, told me stories of some Anishinaabe children he had played with on a dock in Shoal Lake. He's 91 now, this is a long time ago. And he still remembers their names. But what I found out only as an adult was that dock was the dock of the residential school.